Now, his experiments basically lasted from 1930 to 1970. He invented his terminology. He set up the criteria for examining parapsychological examinations. He set up tests. He was the pioneer in the whole science, or pseudoscience, of parapsychology. And up until 1970, really, not too many people noticed what he was doing. The religious world was not sitting up and taking notice of this, and the secular world, the scientific universities, were not sitting up and taking notice either. Beginning with 1970, we have the popular wave of occultism beginning to build. In the early 1970s, there was a veritable explosion of books, magazine articles, games, newspaper articles, television shows, etc., all dealing supposedly with parapsychology. You have parapsychology courses began to be taught in college, and you could get a degree in parapsychology. Even it found its way into public schools, elementary, junior high, and high school. Teachers who were testing kids for their speed level, for their ESP ability. Thus we have three basic stages. There was the occultic spiritistic stage from the middle 1800s up until 1930. And then you had from 1930 to 1970, where J.B. Ryan led the way in pioneering and developing the terminology. And the beginning in 1970 up to 1980, you had the scientific phase, where these things were discussed in the context of cold scientific research. No one used the word ghosts, no one used the word mediums, and no one used the word occult or witchcraft. They used the terminology that J.B. Ryan had established. So now, in the 1970s, all of a sudden, in the secular world, you had an explosion, and everybody began to read it. In the religious world, you had the beginning of a group started by some United Methodists called Frontiers, Spiritual Frontiers, which is a group in mainline denominations in which they encourage pastors and lay people to get involved with parapsychology. Up till 1980, no one wanted to acknowledge the spiritistic or occultic background. What they said was this: mankind, in his evolutionary process, is now developing new psychic abilities. And the reason we have an explosion of interest is because man is now developing these potentials. Well, frankly, they were pulling the wool over the public's eye. Dr. Clifford Wilson and Dr. John Weldon and others have pointed out that the very terminology that they used was rooted in the occult, particularly in J.B. Ryan's work. Beginning in 1980, we find for the first time that in the religious and in scientific circles, they are no longer pretending that they are not involved in the occult. Instead, if you read some of the popular magazines on the newsstand or watch the shows, whereas 5 years ago they would not have talked about spirits, they would not have talked about ghosts, they would not have talked seriously about mediums and seances, they are talking about it now. So you can call up and rent a ghost. You have discussion of setting up equipment to deal with hauntings in houses, dealing with the poltergeist who throws the dishes on the floor. And in the reading in parapsychology, which I have been doing recently, I have discovered that both the secular and religious parapsychology groups, which heretofore had not acknowledged that they were studying witchcraft, that they now acknowledge that what they are studying went under the name of witchcraft for thousands of years. Thus you have groups like Wicca, WICA, and the neo-pagan movement, which instead of being ashamed of their witchcraft background, now glorify it. Even in the worship of Earth Mother, which the extreme feminist movement is now toying with, it is plainly stated that the witches were right. My mother-in-law gave me a book called The Sugar Blues. Now, the book was supposedly against sugar, but actually, as I got halfway through the book was a defense of witchcraft. in which he went on to say that the witches were right, and the witches had psychic power, and the mediums and the spiritists, and all of these individuals were truly where it is at. And today we must dump Christianity and get back to the pagan roots of Western society, that only in witchcraft will our sexual drives be set free, and only in Christianity will we get rid of our guilt feelings and hang-ups. Well, I became very upset with a book that's supposed to be against sugar, but it's actually for witchcraft. But this is what you find right now in the 1980s, is that it is fastly moving back to the world of the occult. What about in the religious world? Well, Spiritual Frontiers, one of their biggest leaders was the Episcopal Bishop James Pike, who denied the Trinity, who denied the miracles of Christ, but attended seances. And he was one of the big leaders in the Spiritual Frontiers movement. And originally, you see, these individuals did not claim any affiliation with the occult. But this last year, there was a Spiritual Frontiers festival held at a local college, which is a church-related college. As part of the festival, they had booths. And the booths were for the palm readers, the astrologers, the crystal ball gazers, and etc. So the Spiritual Frontiers probably, at least to some scholars, is fast moving in the area of blatant occultism. Now, what should the Christian's attitude be toward this whole development? Well, number one, we should not be fooled by a new name. I'll be on various talk shows or in debates or discussions with individuals, and I say, we are dealing now with the issue of the occult. Oh no, we're dealing with science. We're dealing with ESP. It's not witchcraft, it's ESP. See the book? ESP. They think because the name has changed, the game has changed. And you see, the Christians must be very loud and vocal that we are not fooled by an old product dressed up in new clothes. And we must be vocal in pointing out to society in any way we can that this is the same old witchcraft that was peddled for millenniums. The individuals who opposed Moses and who opposed Paul are with us today. Secondly, we should point out that God clearly condemns all of witchcraft or parapsychology as forbidden in Deuteronomy 18:10 through 14. He does not say that it's condemned because it's impossible. He says that it is condemned because God forbids it. Nowhere in Scripture is it ever hinted at that there are no spirits to contact. What we are told in Scripture is simply this. One, there is another dimension. There is a spirit world. But this dimension, this spirit world, is at war. There are those who are good spirits, and there are those who are evil spirits. Thus, this other dimension is a mixture of good and evil, just like our dimension is. We are creatures of the earth, flesh and blood. They are creatures of their dimension, composed only of mind or mental energy. Secondly, the only side which will cooperate in occult arts is the evil side. God is not interested in Ouija boards, crystal balls, seances, levitation. Jesus could care less if you're able to levitate a feather or 1 gram weight. But there are spirits which are very interested in cooperating with the occult arts, and they are the evil spirits. Therefore, the true source of all authentic psychic phenomena must be traced to these evil, malignant minds. The reason I stress authentic, probably 90% or more of all psychic phenomena is fraud. It either is simply something based on chance, which anybody could happen, or it is fraud, like the telepathic course that J.B. Rhine put forth. You need to understand cold reading and the understanding of body language, and then you'll understand why it's fraudulent. I would suggest 2 books for you to read in this regard. Flim Flam by the amazing Randy, The Fakers by Paul Miner. In Flim Flam, you have a magician show you how he can reduplicate everything that Uri Geller does. And you have the fakers, who are two Christians who attempt to do the same. One word of caution, in the fakers they go a little too far and would almost say there is no occult. There are no evil spirits and demons. Everything is a fraud and a magician's trick. Well, you've got two extremes. And you need to take a balanced approach in which you acknowledge those authenticated cases of the occult and trace them to demonic powers, as does Kurt Koch, and then the fraud ones which the magicians will uncover. Thirdly, Christians must educate people about the fact that the new names are an old product and that they must be careful that it is not taught in the public schools. And talking with some individuals, they told me in some of the classes that they had in a local high school right in this county, some of the teachers introduced them to ESP, parapsychology, trying to get the kids to levitate things and find out their psychic level. This is all nothing more than witchcraft. It is religion. If the Christians cannot practice their religion in the public schools, then I am not going to stand around and let the witches do it. So the Christians are going to have to stand up and be counted. They're going to have to be bold and not intimidated. And let me conclude on this mark. Those who are in the secular parapsychology movement, when they are talking among themselves, are absolutely free in discussing the occult and witchcraft and Satan worship and everything else. When they are confronted with the Christian who calls it witchcraft, they immediately have acute amnesia, and they will try to intimidate you that parapsychology is science. What you must repeat ad nauseum to them is this: in order for parapsychology to be a science, they must put forth experiments which can be reduplicated in any laboratory by anyone. J.B. Rhine's experiments could not be reduplicated at other universities. Something that cannot be reduplicated is not scientific. It cannot be observed. It cannot be studied. After all these years, the parapsychologists have yet to establish any clear empirical or scientific evidence of the validity of what they're doing. Or they have gone to the witches and to the mediums, to the Hindu gurus, and to the people involved in the worship of the UFOs in order to produce their experiments. They begin their work with the assumption that there are no other powers at work, and this is their fatal assumption. As a Christian, you must not have in your home, you must not play with, you must not entertain, you must not let your children play with the arts of the occult. Do not read the bestsellers, which are practically all about demon possession. I was in a bookstore yesterday, and I wanted to see what was on the top 10 selling list. Half of it had to do with demons, possessing people. Don't read it. Don't go see the films that glorify Satan, where he always wins in the end. Like I tell my wife, and I said, now when they have the old Dracula movies with Bela Lugosi, then I'd like Ruth Ann to watch, to see the power of Christianity dispel the darkness of Satan. But in the modern vampire movies, he kills the Christians and crumbles the crosses in his hands. I do not care to watch Satan and his lie that he will win in the end. What about the occult? What about parapsychology? It is simply the old device of Satan, in which he tried to have men believe in the divinity of man and in the possibility of man becoming deity. Beware of it, do not get involved in it, and do not be intimidated by the modern witches.